I had a really good first 20 some miles to that last checkpoint before you make the ascent up to Rabbit Ears Pass. And the ascent up to Rabbit Ears is it's just like this, and it's a straight up incline, and it's hands on your knees and huffing and puffing. And I was short on water, and I got up to the top of Rabbit Ears Pass, and there's a turnaround at the top of Rabbit Ears, and there's a gal sitting on the top of the Rabbit Ears, and she's got a deck of cards, and she hands you a playing card, which you then have to take back to the aid station to prove that you made it to the top. And I get back down to the aid station, and I realize that I'm close to cutoff at the aid station, and another runner is also close to cutoff, and we pair up in that moment and decide, all right, we're at the halfway point, and we've trained for this, and we very quickly, within a couple of minutes of discussion, said we're going to get each other to the finish line.
This is your host, Brendan, and you're listening to the Ordinary to Ultra podcast. This podcast is all about helping you run your first ultramarathon and beyond. Tune in to hear new and experienced ultra runners share how they got into running in the first place, what inspired them to run an ultra, training and race day tips, and the gripping story of their first ultramarathon. Prepare yourself to be inspired as you hear stories of grit, sometimes failure, but ultimately triumph when our guests finally cross the finish line. Hey, Andy, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here today, man.
Thanks, Brendan. Super excited to be part of this.
Appreciate you. I'm curious what's your go-to run? Like, you probably have a place, a route nearby that you run all the time. What does that route look like?
I do. I've got a route that is right out my door. And I'm here in the city, so I run pavement really every day, and I really enjoy it. I have very specific routes. I'm very intentional on my routes, and I run a certain route virtually every day. I've got a 5.25 mile route that I run. I run loops. I will not run out and backs. I'm just opposed to it.
Me too.
But so I always run a loop, and I have a rule that I won't cross paths with myself. So 5.25 mile loop, which is my go-to route. Although recently I have been running this 4.6 mile route that I run out the door. I run pretty hard, and I've been enjoying pushing myself harder on these runs. Not necessarily tempo runs each time, but I try to put a lot of vert in this. This is a 4.6 mile route, and it has 400 feet of climb,
Okay.
which is a fun little route to run, but it's got, like, I run a mile up, just a mile straight from 90th Street up to 102nd Street. That is just uphill, and then a little downhill run, and then another big hill that I climb, and then a downhill, and then another great big hill, and a down and a big hill, and up home, and that's a lot of fun. I like running those kind of routes, and I like running challenging terrain, and 100 feet of climb every mile is it's pretty good for here in Omaha. And Omaha is hilly. Omaha's got a lot of hills. So there's ways that you can work in good hill work inside of the city for training for more hilly terrain that you might be prepping for in a race.
Exactly. For your ultras, definitely need hills for that. So that's helpful to have. I have a similar run right outside my house. It's got probably about a mile long hill. Just steady incline the whole time. So it's great for those hill pushes for training for those trail races when maybe it's a little too snowy or when there aren't mountains available. Yeah. So I'd like to go back in time, Andy, to when you first started running. I'm curious what got you into running in the first place.
So, yeah, so I'm going to say it was probably 2013. And there are a couple of things that were happening. Number one was I was 30 in my late 30s and I had three daughters. I wasn't living the healthiest of lifestyle and I knew that I needed a change. So, that was one thing that inspired me. There was also my dad's health was starting to decline. He suffered pulmonary fibrosis, and it was something that he had been suffering from progressively over the years, and that was definitely inspiration, and that's what one of the things that inspires me to this day is to run in his memory. Um, but really, it was that I needed a change of lifestyle, and I needed to pick up better habits. I'd always been athletic. I wasn't really an athlete, but I enjoyed biking. I enjoyed adventuring and water skiing and canoeing and cycling was sort of an earlier pursuit of mine. But I was also overweight. I was a smoker, and I just wasn't living a very healthy lifestyle. And I had these three daughters that I was raising, and I wanted to be around for them. So I made a change in my lifestyle, and I just decided to start running. Um, and it um, started as like a block, like I'd run a block, and
Hmm.
and I couldn't run anymore, and I'd say,
Hmm.
"That's it. That's all I'm going to run today." Then I'd turn around and go back home, and then the next day I'd run two blocks, and I'd stop, and I made sure to stop every time, and I wouldn't push myself. I wouldn't like push myself to the point at which I wasn't enjoying it. I just
Hmm.
made sure that I was enjoying every moment that I was out there doing it. Um, and eventually I was able to run a mile. And I've got this perfect 1 mile loop in our neighborhood that my daughters and I will run. And I just started running it. And I thought, well, I can run a mile. And I wonder if I can run a mile a little bit faster. And then I started running it faster. And then I thought, well, maybe I could run 2 miles. And that just, a mile turned into two and it turned into three. And I had this perfect 3.5 mile loop that I still run periodically, and without crossing paths. And
Of course.
uh, and I just enjoyed doing that. And then and 3.5 miles, that's a 5K. So I can sign up for a 5K.
Yeah.
So
Win.
I signed up for a 5K, and that was fun and that was hard. And I
Hmm.
and I thought, well, I ran it, but I think I can run it faster. And then I did like the progression of running just sort of like it caught on, and I thought, well, this is this is fun, and I'm having some success in doing this, and maybe I can run a little bit farther. And I started to teach myself how to run farther and farther every single time. And that's sort of what led me into just kind of catching the bug of running. Um, is just pushing myself a little bit more and reading and learning
Hmm.
and and listening to others and watching others and then just always being inspired to just keep bettering myself at what I was doing.
That's really cool. My story is really similar. It's like
Yeah.
I needed to get out of the house. I wanted to lose some weight. Started with a mile, was hurting really bad. And eventually that just grew. That's really cool. I love it's really fun hearing a parallel story because so many people's stories are really everyone's story is different. So pretty cool. Um, you mentioned this 5K and challenging yourself with different distances as you realized you could run farther. Um, I'm curious if you've done more. Have you done a mix of trying to run certain distances faster, or is it more interesting to you to just up the distance? The way I look at it is there's maybe two main ways to challenge yourself, like run the same distance you've already done, but faster and learn how to push harder at that distance, or move on to the next distance and that pushes you in a different way. What way do you like
So,
more?
I mean, you're right. There's I guess I enjoyed when I started the 5K. I knew it was like that was not what I was going to be running. I needed to step up to the next distance. So it was a 5 mile, and then it was a 10K, and then it was a 10 mile, and training for each of those was, for me it was more of a progression. Um, I wasn't a marathon runner who was training to run a marathon, but then like backing myself back down to a 5K and trying to figure out how to run a 5K super fast. It was more that I just wanted to just keep through that progression of distance. And I ran that 5K and the 10K, and then I ran a half marathon. And I remember my first half marathon was the Kansas City half. And that was my PR. Of course, it was my first half marathon, but that was my PR for several years. And I couldn't run a half marathon that fast again. But the moment that I crossed that half marathon, I was so excited. I was nearly in tears. My wife was there, and it was just like this great moment. I just did something that was beyond anything that I ever thought I could do. And I crossed the finish line, and within 5 minutes, I was already thinking, okay, what is my next challenge? What's my next distance? And I knew what my next distance was, and I knew where it was going to be. And then I was just already starting to think, okay, is it feasible for me to be in Duluth, Minnesota in June? Of course it is. I can do it. So, and that was in October. And then I figured, okay, I've got time to train for a marathon that's happening in June. Let's figure it out. And within 24 hours, I was downloading plans and trying to figure out how I'm going to make this marathon happen.
Well, it's super cool to hear about your half marathon. It's amazing, the feeling you get when you finish something that's super hard. Half marathon was one of my first serious distances as well, and it was a trail half marathon. It feels great to pass the finish line, just know that you did something hard. But then you signed up for your marathon here.
Yeah.
Was this a road marathon? Was this a trail marathon? What did this marathon look like?
No, it was a road marathon. It was Grandma's Marathon, which is in Duluth, Minnesota. It starts in Two Harbors, Minnesota, which is north of Duluth, 26.2 miles, and it runs entirely along. I'm going to get the highway wrong, but it's North Shore. It's the highway that runs right along Lake Superior, from Duluth all the way up to um, yeah, all the way up to Canada. And it's a gorgeous highway. You are um, you know 50 yards at most away from Lake Superior the entire run. So it's gorgeous. That's all part of where we vacationed my entire life, and I knew that's where I wanted to be. I'd heard about it, so I signed up for it as soon as sign up came available, and it might have already have been open. And then I went out and downloaded a plan, and I think I picked up maybe a Hal Higdon plan. Um,
Yeah.
and I looked at the various plans to see what would fit me as a runner. And I think I picked maybe an advanced plan because I was already running, 4, maybe 5 days a week, and I was running some good distances. And I thought I can do this, and this will, even though it will be a challenge, it will be the right kind of stress that I need. I really didn't know, but if it was going to be right, but I decided to commit to it, and I did, and I ran that plan to a T. And I had a fun time in training. There were a lot of challenges in it. The course itself is a net downhill, but for anyone that knows that terrain, it's just undulating hills. It's like
Hmm.
10-foot inclines every just constant little tiny inclines, and then downhills, and just undulating all the way down. And it's a super fun run itself. And now I've run it 2 or 3 times, and I love the race. It is absolutely a picturesque run, and had a lot of fun doing that. And I bonked. I broke at mile 21 or so, where everyone
Hmm.
does.
Yeah. The
And
wall.
the wall, I hit it, and it's this hill that's called Lemon Drop Hill, which is not
Mm.
that hard. And I've run it in training before, and you look at it and you're like, how can anyone break on this hill? But sure enough,
Come
people
on.
do. And even the second time around, I broke on it again, and I was even better trained, and I had a better time. But it's a beautiful run. It was a great moment to be able to cross that finish line and say, I've done it. Like I just finished a marathon, and I was really proud that day. My dad was. I talked to my dad before the race and after the race, um, and it was a great moment. I had a very close relationship with my dad, so this was a big moment for me in being able to cross the finish line. He was not a runner. He was athletic as well, and he played football in college and growing up, but but he had health problems, and that held him back. So this was a big thing for me to be able to do, and it was a very proud moment for the whole family.
That is awesome to hear.
Yeah. Have you done a Hal Higdon plan, by the way? Have you tried the plans?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I think Hal Higdon is the marathon plan that I have right now. Yeah, he has
Uh-huh.
several different levels, and I think I picked like intermediate or something, and it was like a four 4 hour marathon, maybe,
Okay.
maybe 4.5. But yeah, I've also been going by my Garmin. My Garmin says that it thinks I can run a 3 hour 50 minute mile or sorry marathon. I'm not sure if that's true because that seems really fast, but
Be a believer,
we'll
man.
see.
Just commit to it.
It's
It's
like,
great positive reinforcement what your Garmin
yeah, it
tells
is. I'm like, thanks, Garmin, you're so nice, but I don't know about that.
you. Those
It's
are
like,
good plans, by the way. I mean, I really dig the Hal Higdon plan. Yeah, they're free, and they're definitely boilerplate. There's
yeah,
probably some value in the upsell in the Hal Higdon program and being able to buy into it and get a more tailored program. But it worked for me, and it was for any runner that's starting out. I highly recommend finding a plan like that and adopting that and following it. And yeah, there's definitely going to be times when you're doubting yourself, and can I really do a 10-mile Wednesday run? It's hard. Can I really do a 40-mile or a 50-mile week? They're hard. They're very hard to do, but those plans are designed to create the right kind of stress response and growth in their design. So if that's what's available, go for it and commit to it. But always be smart and listen to your body and rest when you need to and push when you have to.
I appreciate you saying all that and bringing up the Hal Higdon again, because I imagine many of the folks out there listening to this will be either thinking about starting a marathon or ultra marathon training plan, and are thinking about doing it themselves, or maybe if they want, thinking about the assisted path where they get a personalized training plan or maybe even a coach. Um, when you were preparing for your marathon and even your ultras, did you always use a self plan? Did you always do it yourself, or did you ever grab a coach? And if so, why?
I did. I actually, so I had a couple of different coaches.
Okay.
I've had three coaches, but I really just speak to two of them. The first coach,
Okay.
it was not a good fit I think for either of us, but it only lasted a couple of weeks, and I quickly decided I need to switch coaches, and I need to find someone who um, is probably more my fit. And I latched onto this coach, and I used him for a couple of years. He trained me for Chicago, and then he trained me for my first ultra, my first 50K. And his name is Sean Meisner, and he's a former pro runner. He is with Charmin Ultra, um, and he was like like the friend I needed to help guide me on this journey of running. And he picked me up in the middle of training for Chicago, and he got me on the right path, um, helped me through some injury, just some plantar fasciitis or some shin splints, some stuff that I was having, and he helped get me through those, and he pushed me, and then I went out there and I pushed hard for Chicago, and it was fantastic. And I was looking at an email exchange with him from earlier this year, and it was I still consider him a great mentor and a coach, and he coached me for a couple of years, and then I switched coaches to another coach when I was training again for grandmas, and I wanted a PR, and I was really looking for a coach that could be very course specific. And I did pick someone who was a coach who was a Duluth coach who knew the course and knew how to train people for the course, and he ran training groups up there, and he was phenomenal. And I used him again for Twin Cities when I was training for Twin Cities a couple of years ago. I didn't run it, but I had
Twin
to
Cities
bounce.
Marathon.
Yeah, Twin Cities Marathon. I had to
Yeah.
bounce from that race, um,
Hmm.
but he was fantastic as well. So I've had a very positive experience with coaches, and um, um, you know, both of my coaches that I've had, they've both provided the right kind of framework for me to train within. The longer that I've been with a coach, the better, I would say, the higher quality that we've had, simply because we start to learn from one another, and they understand your strengths and your weaknesses. And I made sure to journal every day about my runs, and they'd read and respond, and they'd be able to pick up on some of the nuances, and even in my writing, that obviously he's tired, or he's got some extra pep in him, and maybe we're going to turn that 7 mile run tomorrow into just an easy run. We're going to turn that into a tempo run because he needs a little bit more speed work in his plan right now. So, but I've just had fantastic experience with both coaches.
It's really
Tony Spence
interesting.
was the second coach out of Duluth, and adore him as well.
Mm. And if you were to go back, would you do it the same way? You'd hire a coach,
I would.
and
So, I
why?
mean, since then, like, go ahead.
Oh, and I said, and why? So you
Oh,
hired a coach. Like, why would you recommend to someone to hire a coach versus not? Yeah.
well, so everything I know either from personal experience or from learning from someone else. Um, and whether that's through reading, I've read a lot. I've had books that I've pulled little nuggets from that have inspired me in training, whether it's Hal Corner's uh, ultra running training guide, I believe, or Jason Koop wrote a fantastic book on ultra running, and I used a plan from it and made my own plan for a big race that I did. Um, but so I do like to absorb what other people are teaching. I think that personal touch of a coach is very, very helpful. It helps. It's really that external voice that's helping with that positive reinforcement. Your internal voice is always going to tell you, "Hey, great job," or "That sucked," and you can't always listen to that internal voice. And sometimes you need that external voice to provide the right kind of guidance to you to give you that positive reinforcement that you're doing things right or you're doing things wrong. Even when you think you're doing something right, you may be doing something terribly wrong. Like, hey, I just had a 50-mile week and I had a fantastic time, but my coach looks at that and says, well, yes, but this 50-mile week is coming on the back of a 45-mile week and a 48-mile week, and this 50-mile week was actually supposed to be a 42-mile week, and you were supposed to run it easy. And now we're 3 weeks out from the race, and we have to adjust your training plan accordingly. So I think that having that coach, having that professional who's able to look at things from a much broader view, is incredibly helpful. I don't use a coach for all of my races, um, but when it really matters, now that I've gone through nearly 10 years of running, when I have a race that I'm targeting, I'm gonna get a coach. I'm gonna get the right person to help guide me. Um,
Mm,
and um, and they're gonna help me get to the finish line properly.
that is great advice. Thank you. Thanks for diving into that. Yeah, definitely seems like you can shortcut some inexperience or lack of knowledge when you hire a coach if you can, you know. I definitely would. I'm you could say I'm sort of recently out of college and still feel like I'm ramping up in life, so I don't feel like I have maybe the extra funds for a coach yet, but man, it would be helpful because the way I look at coaches is they help you jump ahead. You know, it's like years of experience could be gained in a few months of time with a coach. Um, anyhow,
You're absolutely right. So I mean, there's so much value there, and yeah, the cost is definitely something that I always keep in mind. Again, I'm raising three daughters, and this is a hobby. This is not a I'm not making money from running. I'm just spending it, and it is my hobby. Um, and and I enjoy it. So I I budget for that when I'm training and racing, and I don't racing, running. So yeah.
great. Well, great advice. Um, okay, let's head back in. Let's head back
Okay.
into the story. We ran you ran your first ultra or not ultra, sorry, your first marathon, and that went well over in Minnesota. What was and then I know you've run an ultra since then. So what happened in the gap between your first marathon and your first ultra?
Um, okay, so my first marathon I think was in 13, 14, so 15, and then my first ultra was a 50. Well, I ran some trail races, a 10 and a half miler, and then a half marathon at Hitchcock, and that one's tough. That one was really tough. Um, that's in December, and it was cold and snowy, and it was very stressful. 3 hour marathon or 3 hour half marathon on some
Ooh.
incredibly tricky hills, and just a ton of vert. And they run 100 out of this course. It's 8 loops on that course, on the half marathon
Whoa.
course. Um, that's torture. But my first leap into an ultra was a 50K called the Psycho Wyco Run Toto Run down in Kansas City, outside of Kansas City, at Wyandotte County Lake. And I think it's 3 loops around the lake. And it was cold. It was a beautiful day. I remember that first race, and it was cold. But it ended up being sunny. I was running in shorts and thermal top. But it got chilly toward the end. And at 50K, I ran it in just under 7 hours, which was, I was pretty pleased of running my first 50K under 7 hours. And it was hilly and tricky, and thankfully it was dry. It was a good race. Um, and I had a great time. A buddy of mine came down, and this is my running partner who he's running the 50 marathons in 50 states, and I'm like like mad respect for what he's doing. But
Jeepers.
he came down and decided to pace me on the last loop, which was a lot of fun. And then we picked up some barbecue and headed home, and a 2.5 hour drive back home. It was a hard race, but it was so much fun. And I think for almost all of the runs that I've done, I try not to do a lot of repeat races. I don't know many of the courses when I'm going in, at least from a running perspective. I may have seen them driving, or I may just know a little bit about the terrain, but I go in very naive and very just very blind into these courses. It makes it a lot more exciting for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was a challenge. It was a real challenge. I had a lot of fun, and I turned around from that, and I think I probably ran another marathon that year, in 17. I think I went back to Chicago and ran Chicago again.
Mm.
And I had a lot of fun. And then from there I just kind of picked up and started running a few more races. I actually went back to Psycho Waiko, the Run Total Run, back in February the next year, and it was rainy and sloppy, and I had screws in my shoes, and it
Oh
was
yeah.
so gnarly. I ended up dropping down to the 20 miler because I got to the point where I just said, I don't want to hurt myself. I had another 50K coming up in the spring that
Huh.
was on new terrain, and I wasn't certain about it. And I just made the decision to just like drop. It was the right decision. And I drive myself off and got in my car and drove 3 hours home. And
Oh man.
sometimes you got to do that.
Drive.
Sometimes you got to
Yeah.
make the choice to pack it in to save yourself for another day.
Yeah. And you'd say that was mainly due to this like the weather conditions and like what that did to the terrain. Like was it just muddy and just
Super
miserable?
sloppy, and the
Yeah.
wet, like the mud was super heavy. It's very
Oh yeah.
laden mud, down in that area of Kansas, and
Yeah.
you're stepping on mud, and there's rocks there's like golf ball sized rocks underneath. You step on this and you roll on top of the rocks, and it was at that point where I just said, all right, it's not worth it. Like I gotta tap out now. And I did, and I
Yeah.
grabbed some chili and a beer, and then headed home.
Yeah. Man, how did you I'm glad you got some good food after. uh how'd you feel after that? That's a hard call to make. You've probably got one side of you going, we can do this. Like it sucks, but we could do this. And then your other sane side of you that's like, well, we have other races coming up. It's probably not worth it. Um, yeah, I mean, how did you feel after making that decision? Were you kind of down on yourself? Were you like, no, this was right, and you felt really good about it? How was that?
I mean, I knew it was the right decision, and there was
Okay.
there was not a part of me that had regret for dropping. That
Okay.
was in February. I had a big race that was coming up um, in May that I wanted to make sure I was ready for, and I was working with a coach at that time, and the coach, even after talking with him, he's like, "You made the right call. That was absolutely right. Let's focus on Superior, and that's your A race for the year. So let's focus on it." And I did, and then um, I took a week off after Run Toto, and then got right back into training. And late February, early March is sort of an iffy time here in Nebraska for training. You're going to have a mix of ice and snow, and sucks to run on that stuff, but that's what we have. So I just threw myself back into training, and I trained pretty hard for Superior, and that was, and then fast forward to the Superior Spring Race, the Superior Spring Trail Race, which is a 50K, and I ran hard, and I had a great time running that race. It was not my best time on that course, but it was my first time on the course, and I had a lot of fun, and that is ultimately what is my standard for running, is that I have to be having fun on the course. And if I'm not, then I either need to retool something that's happening so that I get into that positive mode, or I need to figure out a way out of this. And very rarely do I try and figure out a way out of this, if unless there's some obstacle that is so large that I can't overcome. Then most of the time I'm just gonna push on through. But every once in a while, you do come across those obstacles that are so big, and they're so um, uh, they're arduous. You just can't get past them. And it's okay to say in those moments that this is harder, this is bigger than me right now, and I
Hmm.
need to think about me, and I need to think about tomorrow. And while today is fun, I had some fun early, and now I'm at the point where um, everything sucks and I'm dying and I just want to go home. Sometimes that's the right thing to do, is just to tap out and say, I've had my fun, and now I'm going to pack it away and save myself for another day.
Good point. In your career, you told me before we started this chat that you've run 13 ultra distances. Um, I'm wondering what other, you mentioned this mud and this crazy weather that you experienced in that was your second time doing your 50K, that one, yeah,
Yeah, I
and
think so. I think that was my
yeah.
second. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned this weather. What other big obstacles have you come across in your races that so maybe some of them you did overcome and it worked out. Maybe some of those you didn't overcome. I'd love to hear about these.
Sure. So, okay, so 2019 was probably my best year of training. I had identified a race that I wanted to do. It was way outside of my ability at the time, but I said, I'm going to train, I'm going to do this. And I sat down and I designed my own training plan that was based on a lot of what my coach Sean had taught me, and as well as things I was picking up in things I was reading. And I started to design a training plan that was going to put me in a position at which I could run a mountain ultra um, in Colorado, in what would be, a fairly extreme environment for me, coming from Omaha, Nebraska, here at 1,000 feet or 1,100 feet, and I want to go run something that's really, really difficult. So I picked Run Rabbit Run, which is in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and I picked the 50 miler, with the idea that I'm going to run the 50 this year, in 2019, and then in 2020 I'm going to come back and run the 100. And but one race at a time. Let's go out and let's see what the 50 is like. And Steamboat is
Mhm.
like the Steamboat is my favorite mountain town in Colorado. I love skiing there. It's so fantastic. It's great snow. But I hadn't spent time in the summer there in decades. So I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I knew that if I stuck to a, a training plan and I worked very hard at it, that I would at least prepare myself physically and also mentally for the challenges that would lie ahead. Um, and and I really did. I mean, I was really proud of my training, and I pushed myself hard, and and I logged some tough miles. And then 2 weeks before the race, I went out to Colorado and I spent a week in Boulder, less than a week in Boulder, and then a couple of days in Nederland. And then I went to Steamboat for the rest of the time leading up to the race. And then I went out for the race, and it was hard. Boy, it was hard from the beginning. I don't know what the elevation is at Steamboat, but let's just say it's 7,000 feet,
Hmm.
um, and which wasn't difficult at that point. Being in Colorado for a couple of weeks already, I ran some training runs leading up to that were pushing me up to 12 and 13,000 feet, that were
Okay.
a lot of fun, and I knew that Steamboat was going to bring me up to, I think, about 11,000 feet at Rabbit Ears
Okay.
Pass. of 11,000. So I ran and I got out and I had a really good first 20 some miles to that last checkpoint before you make the ascent up to Rabbit Ears Pass. And the ascent up to Rabbit Ears is it's just like this, and it's a straight up incline, and it's hands on your knees and huffing and puffing. And I was short on water, and I got up to the top of Rabbit Ears Pass, and there's a turnaround at the top of Rabbit Ears, and there's a gal sitting on the top of the Rabbit Ears, and she's got a deck of cards, and she hands you a playing card, which you then have to take back to the aid station to prove that you made it to the top. And I get back down to the aid station, and I realize that I'm close to cutoff at the aid station, and another runner is also close to cutoff, and we pair up in that moment and decide, all right, we're at the halfway point, and we've trained for this, and we very quickly, within a couple of minutes of discussion, said we're going to get each other to the finish line. And for the next 25 miles, we pushed each other so hard in order to get to the finish line, and we made it under the cutoff with time to spare. But it was a moment at which I would not have finished if he had not been there, and he wouldn't have finished, he said, without me being there. And we
Wow.
had this bond in this back half of the race of constantly pushing one another to run. And we'd be tired and we'd be going uphill, and I'd put a hand on his back and push him uphill, and then we'd get to the downhill portion and my legs are jelly, and he'd like push me on the back and push me down the hill a little bit and just remind me to keep on running. And we did that for the entire 25-mile return trip. And it was hard. It was there were definitely, I'd never wanted to quit during that time. There was never that moment of thinking that I was going to quit. I worked too hard for it.
Mm.
I traveled that far, and I
Hmm.
knew that I was going to finish. Even if I was going to finish over time, I was going to cross the finish line.
Mm.
But I was going to work my tail off for it, and I was so happy that I did. So that was, probably one of those moments at which, had it been another another race, I might not have finished.
Mm.
But I had someone there that was pushing me. I had so much external motivation and internal motivation to just push me to just keep moving and keep moving. And having his name is Brian, and having Brian there to push me was so incredibly helpful.
Are y'all still in contact today, you and Brian?
No, we're not. But if we saw each other, we'd know it in a moment. And
Yeah.
he's gone back and he's run rabbit run the 50 since then. And I think he said he was pacing a friend at the 100.
Okay.
21. So I know he's still engaged in that Colorado community. Um, but I've been thinking about going back, and if I do go back to run rabbit run, especially if I run the 100, I'm going to link up with Brian, and I'd like him to pace me or crew me at least, because he
Yeah.
was a good person. He was a good soul to have on the back half for 7 hours or so.
What a pal. And how cool. How cool. I mean, you were a pal too. Just how
Yeah.
cool that you two made that pact together. And I get that vibe from the ultra community at large. If you're new to ultra running or thinking about getting into it, listeners, um, this is, I wouldn't say that's not a common thing. Like that's probably sort of common. Finding a running buddy or someone on the race that you end up running with, and maybe it's not always to that extent that you did, but I hear often that you make lifelong friends when you run these long distances, and that's pretty awesome and pretty special.
I think so. I've just noticed a real strong connection in the community. And I don't have a strong connection on a person to person level in the community, but I know that when I'm out there, I'm surrounded by people that they're definitely um, yeah, they're definitely motivated in order to cross the finish line for themselves, but they're also so motivated in order to help others. And I am as well. When I see someone that's struggling out on the course, you stop and ask them how they're doing. Hey, everything all right? Or if you pass someone on the trail, you say, "Good job, buddy." You're always encouraging and um, always helping one another along. It feels great, and I enjoy it when people are doing the same for me.
That's really cool and special. Thanks for sharing that experience over in Colorado.
Yeah.
I definitely hope to head over there for a race in the future as well. They've got some killer mountains. Um, yes, thanks for those ultra experiences. Wrapping up, I'd like to ask you a couple of deeper questions. One being, you started running with the why of losing weight, I think, from what I remember at the beginning of our conversation, losing weight, being healthy. Um, is that still your why today? Or if not, what is your why for running?
That's a great question. No, I mean, I definitely like being fit, um, and that's definitely a bonus. Um, I have three daughters that are um, looking at my every move, and they're watching everything that I do. So, um, uh, I I can't say that I run for anyone. Um, I run for everybody. I run for myself. I run for the memory of my dad. I run for my kids. I run to be healthy. I run because I love it, and I just have a general I just have a general passion for getting out and and being out alone, um, out on the roads, out on the trails, in the woods, in the mountains, and just experiencing being in touch with nature and really being in touch with myself as I'm out there. Um, I like I like the time inside of my own head and being able to think through the challenges that I may be having or the successes that I've experienced or the next, you know, um, the next great goal that I'm trying to achieve, whether it's running or it's writing a grant application or whatever it may be. I just enjoy the time being out there. But I do also enjoy I know that my kids are watching, and I like being a positive model for them and them seeing me put in the hard work. I like watching them put in the hard work. They're figure skaters, they're competitive figure skaters, and they're up at 4:30 in the morning 4 days a week, and they're at the ice rink, and they're working hard, and then from there they go to school and they have a full day at school, and then from there they come home and they have evening activities and they're working hard as well. So I like to think that what I'm doing is also modeling that behavior for others, and that keeps me going.
That's really awesome. Thanks for sharing that with your daughters as well. Um, lastly, I'd like to ask, what advice would you give a somebody who's looking at getting into ultra running? Maybe they've ran a couple marathons, maybe they haven't ran any serious long distances, but they're interested to get into it. What would you tell these people?
Um,
The end all advice. If there was one thing, I don't know, maybe just
okay,
one of the
so
things.
yeah, keep running, get out there, have fun, work hard, laugh, set some goals, reach some of them, but don't get down on yourself and you don't reach them all. Those are the things to um, just like don't take it too seriously. Have fun doing it. It's supposed to be fun, and don't beat yourself up when things aren't going exactly as you want them to. Not every run is going to be a great run. But also don't trust the first mile. The first mile is a big lie. So when you're out there and you're running and you're not experiencing a fun time in that first mile, give it some time and get past that first mile and then start to figure out if this is the right moment and the right day for you. There are times when it's not going to be right. And that's okay. And you can pack it away and you can come back the next day. But this is not something that you're going to see immediate results from. This takes time and it takes commitment. And if it's for you, great. Then enjoy it. Enjoy every moment that you have.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for coming on today. Thanks for sharing your story, your tips, your advice. Appreciate your time, and thanks again for coming on. Hopefully we can have you on again someday.
Brendan, this is like super fun. I am so excited to be guest number 6.
I
Is that
think so.
right?
I think
Guest
so.
number 6 on Ordinary to Ultra. I dig the name. I hope it sticks. And this is, I mean, I've really had a lot of fun. Best of success with the Sun Marathon, St. George, Utah. That'll be great. I'll be following you and watching the results. So have fun, laugh a lot, smile at all of the other runners, and remember why you're doing this. It's meant to be fun, so have fun. And then your mid-mountain 50K in Park City, that'll be a hoot as well. And stick with the 50K. Your 50 miler will come someday, but enjoy every K out there, all 50 of them. That'll be super fun. I'm envious of you out there in Utah. You've got some beautiful hills to run and some great scenery. So I hope to make it west, that far west, someday here in the
Please do. Yeah, let me know. Come run the Bear 100. That's right where I live. So
would love
you
to.
have to,
Would love
please.
to. That's a hard race. It's a tough race to
Yeah,
get.
it is.
I look forward to maybe someday getting out there. In the meantime, I've got some other things on the calendar, and hopefully our paths will cross here at one of these races soon.
Agreed. Well, thanks again, Andy, and hopefully I'll see you then. Hey, your host Brendan here. I just wanted to thank you personally for listening to today's episode. As someone preparing for my own first ultramarathon, I've found these conversations to be super valuable, and I hope they are for you as well. Whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or somewhere else, make sure to follow or subscribe so you know when the next episode comes out. Also, make sure you check out the show notes of this episode. There's a link to sign up for the Ordinary to Ultra email newsletter, to join our Facebook and Strava groups where you can meet other people striving to run their first ultra marathon, and see any links that our guests may have provided as well. Thanks again, and we'll catch you in the next episode.